Good day, all. I'm David Cash, Dean of the John W. McCormick Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Welcome to the annual Robert C. Wood Visiting Professor Lecture, this year a part of the UMass Boston's Earth Day 50th anniversary celebration. First, thanks to our staff, Bob Turner, Jack Lee, Sarah Hazlett, John Gesso, and especially Rochelle Brown, and Marina Mancia-Hermand from Christiana Figueres' team, who in short order turned this event into a virtual one. Thanks so much. I hope you and yours are doing well, are staying healthy, and are coping in this jarring and unsettling time we're in right now. A time when our neighbors, loved ones, and communities are struggling with COVID and its economic aftermath. When we are seeing a repetition of the most vulnerable bearing the brunt of a crisis. When we are seeing governments fail in their most basic roles of protecting the public. And when we also see inspiring actions, innovation, and creativity, and courageous decision-making by many. And speaking of inspiring, the Wood Professorship is named for Robert Wood, a leading public policy intellectual of the latter half of the 20th century. He was, beyond that, a great doer. As US Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, the Superintendent of Schools in Boston, the Director of Greater Boston's transit system, and for 7 years, President of this University of Massachusetts system, he understood the powerful role government could play in people's everyday lives, and he left a record of formidable accomplishment when he died in 2005. We are pleased that Bob Wood's widow, Peggy, and one of their daughters, Franny, are active members of the committee that organizes this event every year and are part of the audience today. And we are delighted that later on, we will hear from their other daughter, Senator Maggie Hassan, the United States Senator from New Hampshire. We are honored that Christiana Figueres, the architect of the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, is this year's Wood Professor, the 20th in a distinguished line, and the first, of course, to be conducted remotely, with a big audience and a small carbon footprint. Her book with Tom Rivett-Carnac, The Future We Choose, Surviving the Climate Crisis, could not be more timely. I bought a copy for each of my daughters, who are in their 20s and part of the generation deeply invested in choosing their future. Here to lead the discussion today and to take questions from the audience that have already been submitted is an international expert on global environmental governance, Associate Professor of Global Governance here at the McCormick Graduate School at UMass Boston and Director of the Center for Governance and Sustainability. Please join me in your own isolated way in welcoming Professor Maria Ivanova. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dean Cash, and thank you everyone for joining us on this day. Good day to you all joining us around the world. I see a lot of familiar faces. We are honored to welcome today Christiana Figueres, the architect of the successful Paris Climate Agreement. Known as a climate revolutionary and as Climate Summitry's force of nature, Christiana is a formidable public figure. She is also the co-founder, together with her political advisor in the run-up to the Paris Agreement, Tom Rivett-Carnac, the founder of Global Optimism, a global purpose-driven organization. She's also the co-host of a powerful podcast, Outrage and Optimism, and the co-author of that great new book that we'll be talking about today, The Future We Choose, Surviving the Climate Crisis. Christiana is also one of our own at UMass Boston, who has been with us in moments of deepest grief and joyful celebration. 7 years ago, yesterday, on April 15th, 2013, 2 homemade bombs exploded near the finish line of the Boston Marathon, killing 3 and wounding hundreds. Less than 10 days later, on April 24th, 2013, Christiana Figueres was with us on campus, sharing lessons on moving from climate conflict to climate action in our annual Slomov lecture, nurturing our spirit that we have now come to call Boston Strong. A year later, in May 2014, Christiana returned to campus to receive an honorary degree and celebrate the 50th anniversary of the founding of our university. And a year after that, in December 2015, the world celebrated as the green gavel fell in the conference room at Le Bourget in Paris, marking the successful adoption of the Paris Climate Agreement. Today, we find ourselves in a new global crisis, and deeply grateful to be able to turn to you, Christiana, for fortitude and inspiration. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you, Dean Cash, for the lovely invitation. It is sad that we're getting together this way as opposed to in person, which is what we had all looked forward to. But we're all doing the responsible thing. So we are there. And Maria, just before we start the conversation, could I say that I'm sure yours also, but my thoughts and prayers are for so many people who have lost loved ones, for so many people who have loved ones in critical stages of health. Our concern is for the millions of people who are the most vulnerable to the current crisis and who are definitely not yet getting the support that they need. And my admiration and my respect for all of those adults who are trying to work from home while they have 2-year-olds throwing tantrums at their door, their spouses expecting 300 other things to be done, and everyone just trying to be the best person they can under really very extenuating circumstances. So, you know, this is not a Wood lecture under any normal conditions whatsoever, and I just wanted to make sure that we recognize that right at the beginning.
Thank you, Christiana. Thank you, and thank you for your heartfelt compassion to everyone. And you know, the university that we are, the only public research university in Boston, you've been here multiple times, and we all, our hearts go out to what is happening to all of our staff, our students, our faculty. And in 2014, when you were here celebrating with us the 50th anniversary, you addressed our graduates at commencement, and you stated that there is no greater power than the power of choice. We are currently making choices in this crisis that will shape our immediate future and our long-term future. What are the lessons that you think we could take from this crisis that could help us tackle the climate crisis?
Well, you know, Maria, I've been thinking about choice quite a bit during these days of seclusion. And let me just start with the choices that we're making on a daily basis as individuals. And then I will go to more systemic issues. But as individuals, we are all contributing as much as we can to stem the tide on this coronavirus by staying home. What that actually has done is it has put enormous pressure on everyone who is staying behind four walls. It has also put enormous pressure on those who have lost their jobs or are in danger of losing their jobs because they cannot perform the jobs from home. And that means that we are all called upon to make a choice, not about the external objective reality that we are all living in, but because at this point we have little choice in that, but we still have the choice about how we experience our day and our nights, how we experience this very, very new context of being in much closer quarters with friends, if you're isolating with friends, or with family for extended periods of time. And beyond the issues, the context that I've just mentioned, we can still choose who we are during this crisis. And who we are as individuals will, to a great extent, determine the experience that we have and the experience that we share with those who are closest to us. So while it is very tempting and very easy and very understandable to let ourselves fall into holes of, you name it, right? Hopelessness, depression, anger, all of those sentiments, all of which are very understandable. It seems to me that we have the choice of either letting those sentiments run our daily life, in which case we have made ourselves and everyone under our roof completely miserable, or we have a choice to embrace those sentiments and, despite them, be able to bring joy and love and solidarity to those around us. These moments are moments in which the backbone of who we are as a human being is really tested. It's not tested so much in normal routine life, but now that backbone, that, the core of who we are is being incredibly tested. So let's rise to that test. Let's rise and make sure that as much as is possible, and nobody is an angel. I don't see wings sprouting out of anybody's sides, but as much as we can, and certainly with daily intent, we can express gratitude for many beautiful things in this world, and joy for having wonderful people in our life. And above all, we can express support for so many people who really need it right now. So all I wanted to say with that, sorry that I went so long, Maria, is that is a choice, right? That is a daily choice that we're all making about who are we in this moment that is so difficult for all of us. Who are we? So that, I would say, is our first and most important choice. Who do I want to be? Who do I want to be for myself? Who do I want to be for my friends and family? Who do I want to be for society? There is a different choice that is also being made, Maria, at a completely different level, which are the systemic choices that governments are making about how, first of all, how quickly do they react to this pandemic? And it is very evident that those that acted quickly and according to the recommendations of the health professionals are actually doing much better than those that are not. So some countries like Korea, Japan, Singapore, and my own little country in Costa Rica are doing much better than the United States and Brazil, because those governments did not take the risks seriously, did not act quickly enough, and therefore they're having a much, much more difficult national time. So assessment of risk is important, but so is after we deal with the first emergency, which is health, safety, and safety networks, social networks, social protection for the most badly hit. The second step that is already being considered is, what are the characteristics of the recovery packages going to be? And there, I would say the European Union, perhaps predictably, is the group of countries that has thought about this more deeply and realized that no one can afford to deal with two global crises that have the consequences that they have in sequence to each other. No one can actually afford to now deal with the global crisis and the recession that is in front of us, and then deal with climate change. And so the European Union is already making the choice, because it is a choice, of designing the recovery packages to the health crisis in such a way that the very same packages are accelerating the decarbonization of the economy, such that they will be able to provide millions of new jobs, but those jobs will be sustainable in the long term because they will be part of the economy of this decade. And so, that choice, whether you design and implement financial recovery packages only for the short term, or whether you do so for the long term, is actually probably right now the most consequential choice that is being made by every single government. It will determine not just how quickly we get out of this crisis, but it basically will determine quality of life on this planet. And that responsibility is one that most governments, sadly, have not woken up to yet.
Well, thank you, Christiana. I wanted to ask you about those systemic choices, because in the future we choose. You talk a lot about the individual choices and the need for the systemic choices, but you started talking about this in this power of choice. But are there any big systemic choices that we have to take at a global level? And where do you see that leadership coming from? What has happened in the current crisis, we have defaulted to the national. It seems not to be sufficient. In your book, you talk about the necessity to take individual action, national action, and global action. Where can we get the global leadership we need from, and what would be some of those global systemic shifts that we have to make?
Well, I think Maria, you're inviting me to dream, right? What would be the best here? What would be the best results? What would be the most powerful and compelling lessons that we can learn? Fully well understanding that a crisis always produces pain, but also opens up opportunities and new spaces. So what would be those new spaces? If I could wave my magical wand, I would want us to wake up from this, or emerge from this crisis, having learned, I think, 4 things. The first is that solidarity has to be at the basis of every single decision, whether it is a decision at the individual level, at the family level, at the city, or at the government level, federal government level. Solidarity is not, simply a luxury. Solidarity is a basic tenet of human life, and we tend to forget it way too often. And I've just been delighted to read every day more and more beautiful, inspiring, moving stories of people who during this crisis are acting in solidarity with others at the individual level. But we also have to understand that we have to act in solidarity at the global level, at the national level, solidarity with others. So, a primacy of solidarity, particularly after we have seen what the absence of that can do, would be one of my dream lessons. The other dream lesson that I hope we will develop is the importance of multilateralism. And like you, I am very concerned that the way that we're going about this is basically the other direction, right? We've been told that the way that we can contribute to this is to close ourselves into our 4 walls. Building walls between me and my neighbor, building walls between this country and the next country. And this wall building mentality is a short-term necessity, but is not a long-term solution, because we know that global issues require global solutions, and that if you do it piecemeal, we actually duplicate efforts and minimize the impact. So the strengthening of multilateralism would be another lesson that I would see. By the way, I don't see that happening yet. I don't see that happening yet. The third would be a realization of what is the true engine of growth. We have, and this refers to the fossil fuel economy that we're still living in. We've had more than 100 years in which we have depended on fossil fuels to be the engine of growth in so many different ways, and that's understandable. And they have actually provided us with quite a bit of economic growth, uneven as it is between global north and global south. But much of the economic development that we have today is thanks to the fossil fuels. However, it is time to thank the fossil fuels and put them in the retirement home, because they have run out. Their time has run out. We now know what we didn't know 50 years ago, which is that the use of fossil fuels has a huge unintended consequence that is climate change. And so we know we can no longer afford that. And we also know that we have huge possibilities with renewable energies that have come down in cost incredibly. So to understand what the engine of growth is for this century would be my third choice lesson. And my fourth choice lesson, Maria, after this, regeneration of nature. Can we actually grow up and realize that we have had very much of an extractive mentality? We have been extracting, use, extract, use, discard, extract, use, discard. And that mentality and that action, that cycle that we have had has brought us to the environmental disasters that we have now. And we have to understand that there is a very, very deep link and interdependence between human life and nature. And that now that we have destroyed so much, the third massive bleaching of corals around the world, 60% of the animals that existed when I was a young child, we have successfully exterminated. We have cut down 1/3 of the forested areas of the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we have put a lot of energy, time, thought, and money into extracting from nature. We have to turn that around. And we now have to put the time, the thought, the energy, and the money into regenerating nature. Not just removing the pressure, which is what has happened over the past month. We have removed the pressure, and so we have seen nature begin its process of normal resilience. But frankly, because of the depth of the damage that we have caused, just removing pressure is not going to do it. We're going to have to remove the pressure and regenerate very intentionally. And we can do that. We have all the tools. We know what has to be done in all ecosystems. It's a matter, again, of choice. So, if you're inviting me to dream, those would be my 4 dreams.
Thank you. Thank you, Christiana. We will turn very soon to Senator Maggie Hassan, who is with us on this call, and she will ask the first question in person. But before we do that, I want to circle back to your regeneration and talk a little bit about the personal regeneration. So Tom Rivet-Karnak and you are your co-author, and you are very strong proponents of mindfulness and personal regeneration. How can we be more mindful and less depressed in this age and day when we're locked down at home? What is your daily practice, Christiana?
Well, yeah, when we wrote the book, we didn't know that the pressure would be really on for personal regeneration, which is what we have all of us right now. And that circles back to where we started this conversation, Maria, about the choices that we make every day about who we are as people. And it's interesting that we are capable of quickly going to the side of a family member or a friend who needs us, and we're capable of supporting that person in whatever shape or form until that person is back up. but we don't think of ourselves as needing that kind of support and regeneration. And so we haven't put ourselves in the center of caring and of mindfulness. And if there is one personal lesson from this time in which we're all under four walls, that's it. We cannot, we know how quickly we go into fights, stupid fights, or maybe even intelligent fights, but into situations that we might regret later when we're all confined, four walls under one roof, if we're not mindful of who we are, what we say, and how we act. And this is like, pressure, real focus. It's like putting on the headlights right smack on top of ourselves and saying, whoa, this is the moment in which I really have to act out of the highest sense of self. So whichever way you regenerate, if it's exercise, I'm exercising, 100 times more than I used to, thanks to the support of my colleague. You see, here's where we go. So Marina Mancilla, who's isolating with me, is the best slave driver here for exercise and make sure I get out there 2 times a day. Thank God for that. But we have to support each other, right? So whether it's exercise, whether it's meditation, whether it is, focusing on the beautiful plant outside your window, or whether it is planting a seed in your balcony, or whether it is singing, or whether it is reading, whatever you use to ground yourself, to ensure that you are calling forth the best sense of who you are and not just being reactive to everything out there, to other people around you, and to the news, for heaven's sakes. We have to, this is the moment in which, above all, we are called to set our personal anchor and ensure that we are anchored in happiness, in joy, in gratitude, in love, and act out of that ground and not on the opposite, because the effects will rebound, and we will notice it ourselves, and certainly those around us will notice it.
Actually, on that note, Christiana, I want to circle back to climate before we move to the questions, to your role in the Paris Climate Agreement, because you did lead a tectonic shift in the narrative. And we're hearing it in your narrative right now. It is different from what we hear from in the news all around us. And people have noticed that there were a lot more women leaders in the climate stratosphere. Why was that? How did that come about? And how are women leaders making a difference in global climate governance and beyond?
Yeah, well, I was very grateful for that because, in my role there at the UN, I had the amazing opportunity always to have a seat that was just a few meters above everyone else, right? And so it gave me the perfect eye view, bird's eye view. And, over the years, I very, very intentionally noticed that the negotiating teams that were all sitting in front of me were being increasingly populated by women and by young people. Very cool. Now, part of that was, of course, a lot of work behind the scenes, a lot of work with heads of delegation and governments to convince them that they would be better off by having a full rounded team rather than just a team that represented 50% of their population. And so, a lot of that was that behind the scenes work with them, plus work of the women's constituency that formed itself under the convention and supported each other and taught each other, right? Because you can't just walk from any other responsibility in the government and then be an international negotiator. There's skills that you have to learn. And I was always so impressed about how the older or the more experienced female negotiators were so generous in mentoring the new ones that came in. But part of it was certainly part of the system and very intentionally. But I actually also think, Maria, that a lot of it was because environmental issues, especially long-term environmental issues, are belong to a field of issues that are very propitious of female leadership, because we tend to be more collaborative. I'm sorry for all the wonderful men who are listening to this, but it doesn't mean that they're not collaborative men. I actually know a few, in fact, maybe even many collaborative men. But my point is that we just come more naturally to the collaborative thinking. We also come more naturally to the long-term thinking. And we definitely come more naturally to the grounding of stewardship. That really is in our DNA. In our DNA is the responsibility for future generations, and generations down the line. And so the sense of stewardship of our planet and of our descendants is something that nobody has to teach us, right? I mean, that's just it right there. And for all of those reasons, I think that the climate negotiations, but also all other environmental issues that have to do with these, are just really, really powerful magnets for women to bring their skill sets and their attributes to. And so, and perhaps many other reasons, but for whatever reasons, I was always very grateful when I saw more and more women being there. And I directed one COP, the South African COP, that was really fun because I had a female COP president, I had a female head of the G77, I had a female head of the EU, I had a female head of security for the entire conference, and myself as the executive secretary. And I am telling you, that was a fantastic group of women.
How wonderful. And now we're going to turn to a fantastic woman senator from New Hampshire, Senator Maggie Hassan, who is Bob Wood's daughter. And she is a doer like her father, who is a policy practitioner at all levels herself. She has served New Hampshire as a state legislator, as a governor for 2 terms, and now she is in the United States Senate representing New Hampshire. So Senator Hassan was also herself a Robert Wood visiting professor 4 years ago. I would like to invite her because I know she has a question to you from DC.
Thank you so much, Professor Ivanova, for moderating this and drawing out our wonderful guests so beautifully. I've been able to be on the Zoom now for a few minutes. And Ms. Figueres, thank you so much for your work and your generosity with your time and expertise and experience here. As I think everybody may have heard other speakers allude to, my dad really believed in the power of the academy, the power of social science and science to inform the human experience and to help us get past often what are artificial choices in terms of public policy and find a way forward informed by the work of the academy in so many different ways. So it is really great to have you as a guest. And it is particularly meaningful to me to have you as a guest and to participate in this wonderful conversation today, given the moment of time and of history we are in, where sensitivity to the human experience and the future of our race and our globe are so critical and in such high relief, and where public policy is so important, and the need to overcome conflict is so important. So I'm really, really grateful, and I've already learned a lot from listening. I did have a question that speaks to this need to make sure that we're informing our policy with true information. And it really goes to the connection between climate change and climate change policy and public health. So I have become this week aware, as I'm sure many on the Zoom have, that the Harvard School of Public Health just published a study that linked exposure to air pollution with a higher mortality rate from COVID-19. And forgive me for looking at my notes, everybody, but I believe its finding was that an increase of only 1 microgram per cubic meter of air in fine particulate matter is associated with a 15% increase in the COVID-19 death rate. I mean, that's really a stunning statistic. Just yesterday, despite the advice of its professional career scientists who didn't want the EPA to do what it did, the EPA went ahead and kept its national ambient air quality standards the same, instead of strengthening them to prevent our people from air pollution. So can you please comment on the connection between climate change and public health, and perhaps on the way that you think our global experience with COVID-19 will change the way we advocate to combat climate change and change our policies so that we're supporting a sustainable globe? Thank you so much.
Yeah, Senator, thank you very much for that question. I think you put your finger on the question of the moment right now, the question of the moment. Because of course there are many who would want to separate these two things. One thing is the COVID pandemic and something else is climate change, and we'll deal with climate change 30 years from now. Well, you know, that's just not the case, because just to put a few more statistics to the important ones that you've already mentioned, we already have 7 million deaths around the world from air pollution, 7 million. Most of them from air pollution caused by the burning of fossil fuels, either because they are coming, the pollution, the local pollution is coming from coal-fired power plants that contaminate the air, or because of the fossil fuels that we burn in our vehicles, both light vehicles and heavy vehicles. Hence, cities are where air pollution is the worst. And where do humans concentrate? In cities. So the consequence of all of that is that we have 7 million people today dying needlessly from air pollution, still because of our dependence on fossil fuels. On top of that, that is a reality that we have known for a long time. And you know, the health arguments to get rid of fossil fuels, we just haven't used them in a compelling enough fashion to be able to change public policy, because the first health protection measure that we should do is get rid of fossil fuels. Now, on top of all of that, now we have the nexus between those people whose lung capacity and respiratory capacity is already compromised because of air pollution, and they are the ones that are most vulnerable to being disastrously affected by COVID-19. It doesn't mean that they're the only ones that get the virus. It means that they are the ones that are most affected and more likely actually to be either at death or close to death. And that's just a crime, right? It is just a crime. So yes, I totally understand that the health pandemic is acute, and climate change is chronic, but you know, my voice that I'm using now is, let's not separate these two things. Let's not pretend that we can, you know, throw trillions of dollars now at somehow, you know, recovering the economy, and that those $1 trillion are going to go to ensure that the fossil fuel industry continues to pollute the air that we breathe, because then we haven't done anything about health. And so if we can throw the trillions of dollars that we're already going to destine to the recovery packages after that, but if we do that in a measured and thoughtful way, such that the same funds that are being used for economic recovery will also help us to decarbonize the economy, now we're actually converging the solution, right? The fact is that those two emergencies, health and climate, have collided in ways that we could never have predicted. But once that collision has happened, let us converge the solutions.
Well, thank you for that. That's a wonderful way to frame it. It's something I will take to heart. I unfortunately am going to have to leave the meeting now to take another conference call. I think probably like everybody out there, we're amazed at how busy this Zoom life of ours is. But thank you so much. And Professor, thank you. Thank you for letting me participate. And I look forward, some of my staff is still on the Zoom, and I look forward to hearing more about the question and answers. Take care. Be well, everybody.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for joining us. I'll turn to a few questions that we have received online. We have Julia Martin Lefebvre joining us from Paris. She's the former Director General of IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And here's what Julia says, Christiana. Christiana, as always, it's so good to listen to you. In your book, and you and your co-author remind us of the need to acknowledge humanity's dependence on nature. I, of course, totally agree with that. But with hindsight, do you think that it was wise of governments in 1992 to set up two separate UN conventions, one on climate, which you headed, and one on biodiversity, as if those two issues had nothing to do with each other? How can the all-encompassing life support that nature provides us be adequately understood when our governance systems are organized in silos?
Very good question. Very, very good question, and one that that I've been battling with since I was at the UN. And you know, just to compound Julia's question, not only did in 1992 we, the citizens of the world, in our infinite wisdom, we created a convention for climate change. We created a convention for biodiversity. We created a convention for desertification. And now there are many who want to create a convention for oceans, as though all of those things were actually separate from each other, as she says, you know, in silos. I mean, can you not hear nature laughing at us, right? She must be up there roaring with laughter saying, how stupid can they be? Because that's not the way that she operates, right? She doesn't operate like that. Everything is interconnected. If you look at the carbon cycle, it brings all of these ecosystems together. If you look at the water cycle, it goes through all of those ecosystems. I mean, it is ridiculous to think that these things are separate. Now, we humans in our infinite wisdom did that at the United Nations, but we also do it at our local governance levels, right? We have a minister for agriculture, we have a minister for forestry, we have a minister for oceans, we have, you know, minister for climate change. So we replicate the silo thinking at the level of national governance as well, and very often even at city level. The answer that I have to that is that the issue is so complex that it only makes it possible for us to get our brains around it by separating artificially these things and looking at them with a particular focus. So that I understand. What I don't think is helpful is while dividing it into its components, that we don't have a very intentional combination mechanism, a mechanism that at city level, state level, federal level, or United Nations level actually combines this and brings it back together where it originally was. And Maria, you and I have been talking about this, I don't know for how many years, right? How many years? And UNEP, of course, tears its hair out because they can't understand why they have all of these different conventions, and some of them report to UNEP and some of them don't. I mean, it just gets very, very unmanageable. So I don't have a good answer. I just know that if for the time being it's not possible to bring all of this under the same governance system, because I understand the complexities of it, we should at least, those who are sitting in the seats responsible for the governance of each of those conventions, at minimum, should really understand that all of these things are linked, and at minimum have overarching conversations about, if this happens on climate change convention, how does that affect biodiversity or desertification? And, you know, I mean, I tried with my colleagues while I was there, but I can't tell you how difficult that conversation is. And that's sad. That is sad because it doesn't reflect reality of nature, and certainly it doesn't give us the best results. So yet another call for us to act, of course, with focus, but think laterally.
And to reiterate what Senator Hassan was saying, this is what higher education is for. And that's what we're trying to do in our classrooms. And that's why you've come to our campus so many times and engaged with our students, because we are doing it. And I'm going to turn to a couple more questions, and I'll bring them together that touch on similar issues. So Linda Carney Goodrich and Carl Todd, together, they ask the following: what advice do you have for young climate activists? What do you think is the most effective use of our time, and how do we not despair? And any suggestions for how we organize on campus when we're working remotely?
Yeah. Such good questions. And I wish I had, you know, a quick answer that I can just pick out of box number 32 and here you are. But the fact is, first, let's remember that this is not permanent, right? That we will, much as the tunnel seems incredibly long and incredibly dark right now, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And so we're not in a permanent situation, we are in a temporary situation. How long temporary is going to be, we don't know. But eventually we will be able to get out and to go back to the streets where I think a lot of action is happening. Now, what is fascinating to me is that the climate movement that is on the streets, Fire Drill Fridays or Fridays for Future or Sunrise Movement or Extinction Rebellion, or, you name it. All of those wonderful people that have taken to the streets, they could never have organized themselves were it not for the social media channels that we're all using and abusing right now. And so, we shouldn't see these things as being antithetical to each other. Rather, there is a lot, if you can't go out to the streets on Friday, why not use the Friday hours that you would be on the streets to think together with other young people who are local to you? What else can we do at the local level? Because this is going to be a struggle that takes all levels, right? In my little town, in my community, in my city, in my state, it takes work at all levels. And being out there and in civil disobedience is super important, but it's equally important to begin to help our homes, our families, our cities, our communities to decarbonize, literally. So every single one who can't get out to the streets should first of all figure out what their carbon footprint is right now. Go out, go there, go look at the carbon calculator and figure out what your carbon footprint is. And then figure out how are you going to bring your carbon footprint down, and the one of your family, and the one of your town, and your neighbors, and your friends, so that we can actually begin to contribute very, very concretely to the decarbonization that has to occur at all levels, at our personal level all the way up to the global level. But we have to be able to have that flexibility of working in different ways and at all different levels.
And let me turn to two more questions that build up on this. So Betty Krikorian asks, how should we frame climate change messages to engage neutral people and climate deniers? What is the framing? And Natasha Grist from the University of East Anglia in the UK says, what can be done to address equity and social outcomes within our imperfect global systems in the time of crisis?
Oh, well, two very easy questions.
Mm-hmm.
So in inequity, let me start there. if ever we had the most glaring example of inequality, it is right now with COVID, right? Those of us who live in the global north are having a hard time and living under pressure. And many have even lost their jobs, but I guarantee that it pales in comparison to the experience that is being had by millions of people in the global south. Just imagine what the situation is in the slums of India and Bangladesh and Pakistan, where you have 12, 14 people living in one room. How are they going to isolate? They don't even have clean water, let alone soap. How are they going to wash their hands? How are they going to say, okay, this child has a virus, we're going to isolate this child, and all of the other 13 people, what, they're going to go and sleep in the other corner of the room? That doesn't help. So, so the inequality that we have been seeing exploding throughout the past 5 to 10 years is getting even worse now with COVID. And it is honestly, it is tragic. That is why I am so intent on on the design of the recovery packages, because the recovery packages have to be inclusive. They have to start from the bottom up, from those who need it first. Those who need it most, they should be the first, A. And B, they should begin to move the economy toward an economy that is not, again, going to sacrifice the most vulnerable with the climate change hits, because we know that it is the poor and those in the bottom of the pyramid that will be most impacted by climate change. We can't double that hit. So we have to be careful, and we have a huge opportunity with these recovery packages. When else are governments going to have the political willingness and the political space to actually throw trillions of dollars at a problem? This is it. This is it. Let us understand that this is actually a huge responsibility, to not say an opportunity, to actually correct many of the wrong decisions that we have had in the past. And sorry, Maria, what was the first question?
The question was, how do you
deniers,
address climate deniers?
Yeah.
Quickly, and we'll wrap up.
Okay. Actually, I don't spend my time with deniers anymore. So, you know, if you meet someone who really totally decides that they don't want to believe it, just, you know, bless them and let them go. Because if they don't believe in gravity, that's fine. Gravity still affects them. If they don't believe in climate, that's fine. Climate still affects them. So I wouldn't even start there. However, there are many people who are not deniers, who are just, they don't really understand. And that is worth your while. That is worth your while to first understand from them what is important to them, and then educate them and share with them your knowledge through the channels of what is important to them. Because climate change actually pervades every single aspect of human life. And so you can, if what's important to them is human health, you have a compelling argument. If it's economic development, you have an argument. If it's inequality, whatever it is that is important to them, don't, you know, preach climate science at them, but figure out what is important to them, and then explain and share with them how climate is affecting what is important to them.
Thank you, Christiana. And as we wrap up now, I would like to share with you a reflection, a collective reflection from my global environmental governance class that I taught yesterday on Zoom. And I asked my students who are reading your book, yesterday the book was the assigned reading, to write on virtual paper. We have this virtual class notebook where they all write together, and to write their reflections on your book. And here is a collection of individual reflections, that just to leave that with you from us, from our class in global environmental governance, to you and to the world. Here's what my student said. Reflecting on the future we choose gives me hope. This is a very powerful book, which calls for change of our mindsets to influence our actions. And to do that, we must hold conversations with the other. We must act as a global community. Reading this book inspired me to engage more with art. I would like to write a sci-fi steampunk series set in a desert environment where a band of rebels protect and pass down clean energy secrets. A book that gives a multicultural look on climate, blending science, adventure, and heart-inspiring change. We are powerful. We make the change. We write the new story.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
So that's it from us. Christiana, any last words as we close this first ever virtual Robert C. Wood Professorship at UMass Boston?
We're doing so many things for the first time these days. It just proves how we can be flexible and adopt very quickly. Maria, thank you very much, and David, thank you very much for the invitation. Just, you know, my admiration for the work of you personally, but beyond that, of UMass for always being a beacon of understanding in the larger Boston, Massachusetts area. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, everybody. And of course, thank you so much, Christiana. Wonderful to have you here. Thank you, Maria, for moderating that fantastic discussion and bringing questions from the outside, especially if the staff of Senator Hassan is here. Thank you so much for your assistance. And again, thanks to both of our staffs, Christiana, your staffs, and our staff for all the work that's gone on, and really appreciate it. So thank you very much, everybody. And we'll bring the meeting to a close. Thanks so much.